How's it going, everybody? It is your favorite apostates. I'm McKay.
And I'm Jordan.
And happy Friday to you all. We have a little bonus episode today because there was a subject that was kind of new that popped up. Today's Thursday. We're filming today, but yesterday that came up. So here we go. The very first of anything on this channel. It's Ex-Mormon News Hour with your anchors, McKay
and Jordan.
And your favorite apostates. So today there was a article that came out in the Salt Lake Tribune that had some very interesting things to say in regard to BYU.
It is true. We're poets. So the Salt Lake Tribune shared a story that's been picked up by other news outlets as of this evening, Thursday. But the gist of it is the U.S. Department of Education is investigating BYU's policies regarding LGBTQ plus students and whether they are covered by Title IX exemptions issued to the religious-based university in Provo. So apparently this investigation started in October, and apparently the investigation is one of more than 1,400 ongoing investigations at U.S. schools and is based on a March 2020 complaint. So it seems that we have a pattern here. The Office of Civil Rights is the one doing the investigation, and they never comment on pending investigations, so it's not like we have a ton of information.
No.
But allow me to read to you how BYU has responded to these claims. BYU maintains that the text, structure, purpose, and history of Title IX make clear that the term sex is not ambiguous and refers only to biological differences between males and females. And therefore, Title IX does not apply to discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. That was the quote from Kevin, what's his name, Worthen? Whatever the hell his name is, he's the president of BYU. He's an attorney. Shocking. But that's what he said. And I've been so shocked by this information that it did not occur to me until one of our lovely followers reiterated that statement, essentially, BYU unintentionally confirmed that there is a distinction between those two things.
Literally, all throughout the temple videos, I've been saying, there's no distinction between sex and gender in the Mormon religion. They are the same thing, and they think that gender is eternal. It's not something that changes or anything like that. I would like to say that they did not. That was a very calculated move because they have no other ground to stand on other than yielding that gender and sex are two different things. So that was the literal loophole. They were like, well, I guess it, this is our path, and we're just they won't say anything about that. Doctrine won't change. That's their legal argument. So
what we're doing,
but that was an excellent observation. Thank you to whoever that was.
So today, pending this information and pending, the amount of questions that we get from you guys on these topics, we decided that we would put together kind of a Mormon perspective on the LGBTQ plus community. What are the Mormon stances on these things? How do they treat members of the LGBTQ plus community? Things of that nature. So because we've had lots of questions about that and because of all this stuff that's happening, we figured we would address it. So content warning for now going forward, we are going to be talking about kind of a little bit of a history with Mormonism and BYU, which involves things like reparative therapy or conversion therapy. And just in general, Mormonism has a lot of homophobic shit.
So just be aware of that.
Just be aware if those things are something that you just are not in a mental place to be able to handle right now. We are not offended. So
yep,
just keep that in mind.
Also, something to keep in mind, we are not attempting to speak for people of the LGBTQIA plus community. The most of the queer experience that I've ever gotten is being on YouTube and people trying to insult me by calling me a girl. So yeah, we don't have a lot of experience, but we are trying to come at this from a informative perspective, so people are kind of more understanding of what's going on with the Mormon Church, BYU, and the LGBTQIA community.
In fairness, and I've talked about this on Instagram before, I don't really like labels. I don't really like those kinds of things. I don't like putting myself in boxes because I came from Mormonism and that's where we are. But I have talked about on Instagram before. We've answered questions about it. I probably fall in line with the bisexual group. But I just don't like labels. So
we are cis people in a heterosexual relationship, so. But
I still identify with that. So I guess you would consider me a member of the community, even though I don't personally, I just don't like labels. I'm not saying that I don't like being a part of the community or anything. I just don't like labeling things. But that's just me. So, but I want to reaffirm what he just said. We're going to talk about BYU. We're going to talk about BYU's position within the honor code about, sorry, I'm still recovering from being sick, so you'll have to bear with me. We're going to talk about BYU's stance. And the number one question we get is, if you are a part of the LGBTQ plus community, why would you attend a university that is not affirming of that community and that has written in its honor code that you cannot engage in those types of behaviors? So we're not trying to speak for anyone. We're not saying that we represent the community as a whole. We're not saying, like, we can't speak for all situations. There are people who identify as part of that community who want to go to BYU and are well aware of the circumstances and things that will apply to them should they go to BYU. And that's fine. And there are also people who don't know that they're part of that community until they get to BYU and they start exploring that more. There's like 5 million different circumstances for why people end up in these situations. So we're not trying to judge one situation or another, and we're going to keep coming back to that statement as we navigate this. That is not our intent. There are thousands of nuances to the situation, and so we can't possibly cover all of those things in this video. So just keep that in mind. If there's things or points or things that we missed, that's likely going to be a thing because we can't cover all of it. Let's talk about on the whole. We've alluded to some things in the past, especially within the temple videos. We've talked about how Mormonism defines most things within a binary context, right? And that includes gender. There is no real room for nuance to that within Mormonism, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I wanted to start off with my one of my two favorite quotes around this within the Mormon community, because it was especially triggering to me at the time, but now I look back on it with some humor. But I understand that most people are going to look at this with frustration, which I also feel. So this quote is from Dallin H. Oaks. He was an apostle at the time. He still is, except he is in the first presidency, which means he is just under the prophet. And
it is also worth noting he's the next in line to become the prophet once Mr. Russell M. Nelson, who is f***ing old.
It's true.
Also, I just wanted to add about Dallin H. Oaks. Sorry for cutting in. Dallin has the most punchable face of all of the apostles. He's also the one who just has so much to say that really doesn't need to be said. So we will go hard on Dallin H. Oaks all the time. Anyway.
It's true. Also, you probably noticed I have a new tattoo. I forgot to address it. And if I don't address it, you guys are all going to comment about it. So I figured I'd say something. I do have a new tattoo. It's super cute and I love it. It is. You probably can't see it. Maybe McKay will put up a picture, but it is Eve holding an apple with a danger noodle behind it, which is a snake, if you didn't know.
For the uninitiated, it's a snake. Anyway, okay. Back to the topic.
Back to our topic. So this is a quote from Dallin H. Oaks from an interview that he did on what they call same-gender attraction, where he said, "I can also imagine some circumstances in which it might be possible to say, yes, Come, but don't expect to stay overnight. Don't expect to be a lengthy house guest. Don't expect us to take you out and introduce you to our friends or to deal with you in a public situation that would imply our approval of your partnership. So this comment was made in the context of if you have a gay family member who is going to bring their partner over to you, a Mormon person's home, this is how they would respond.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Excellent precedent that we're setting.
And then this second one, we've actually talked about this on TikTok. If you've been with us for a while, you might remember this. I don't remember how long ago it was. It was a while back. The church did a pamphlet book
I think
type
it was
thing.
like the 70s.
Was it the 70s?
At least.
So they did a book on homosexuality with a bunch of things, right? So there are a lot of things that Mormons previously believed to potentially cause homosexuality, ranging from masturbation to like having a father who wasn't involved in your life, to having a smothering mother, to biological things, addiction, pornography, family dysfunction, sexual abuse, selfishness, speaking about it.
Don't talk about being gay or else it's in the air.
You'll be gay. Gender nonconforming dress or behavior. So those are all things that they have said in the past potentially cause someone to be gay. So in this little pamphlet that they used to give out to people, they talk about masturbation specifically, which, remember, masturbation is a sin within the Mormon church. So this pamphlet says, quote, "When in bed, if that is where you have your problem,
masturbation,
for the most part, dress yourself for the night so securely that you cannot easily touch your vital parts, and so that it would be difficult and time-consuming for you to remove those clothes."
Don't you know that pants are like a solid? They
apparently you gotta pull like
you have to be. I'm the kind of person that has to be naked in order for that to happen. So.
You gotta put like all your garmies on. Like you gotta do like layers and then some sweatpants and then.
Well, at this time it would have been probably only the one-piece garment, so you got that going for you. But you still got the little flap if you're a guy in front for easy access. So yeah, you have to wear a belt.
So these are the kinds of things that they teach and tell you. So there, and I mean, this is funny, but there is, why we included this is there is a connection between this and what they thought was a cause for being gay at the time. We're going to throw up this table because this kind of summarizes it nicely. This is from Wikipedia, and it just like put everything into a nice little perfect little thing. So
each it's notable to say that each little piece on here has a citation.
Yes.
On some of them there's multiples. So.
And we are thoroughly familiar with the majority of these things. So we have it organized into 3 areas. So we have the earlier teachings, the traditional teachings, and the current teachings. So we have a few things. Initially, like when this first started to become a topic, the church did not had a firm position on whether or not you were born feeling gay or identifying as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And they did not think that was a thing. They did not think that you could be born a member of that community or feeling or identifying with those things. So that was their stance. It was pretty firm. Kind of switched over to a maybe at some point. There was some murmurings about both. But currently, they officially state that they have no position whether or not you can be what they would say born homosexual.
Because that would mean they would have to admit that if you were born that way, God intended you to be that way, which is sinful. So
it's true.
Or a mistake, and God doesn't make mistakes.
So as far as causes go, we listed a bunch for you. So in earlier teachings, they did believe that there were causes for them, and most of them were... Some of them were things that you couldn't control, like if you were sexually abused. But the majority of them were controllable things. So it implied that if you identified as gay, that there were things that you were doing that were causing you to do that. Because being gay is a sin, right? So because you're masturbating, that means that you're contributing to the fact that you're gay. Like, you're causing your gayness, essentially.
Yeah. Or you're drinking alcohol and that's making you gay.
It's making you
have
gay.
An addiction. You're an alcoholic.
So that's how it was used back then was, well, if you just stop doing this, then you're going to stop being gay. If you stopped being selfish, if you stopped watching porn, there's a huge link in Mormonism between pornography and all kinds of other things, including what the church would identify as homosexual behavior. So that was the earlier teachings. Some of those have persisted into now, but for the most part, traditionally, Mormons would say there's probably a biological and environmental piece as far as causes go. But that has changed as of recently, where they have firmly stated that they have no position on the causes. So they're very clear in their no position statements now.
Very clear in their ambiguous answer to that question.
Exactly. There's a reason for that. So earlier teachings, it was wrong to use gay labels or to identify as a part of the LGBTQ plus community, which has made it grand transition into now where they have said that identifying as gay is acceptable.
But you can't act on it.
And that's where we arrive at for our initial point about Mormons, is they are similar. I've had a few people message me saying that this is similar to Catholics and that being gay isn't a sin, but acting on it is. And so that's really the position of Mormonism as well. So as far as sexual orientation change efforts, as they would say, so there's a few things that we need to touch on here. The church has done a variety of things in the past, including aversion therapy, conversion therapy, reparative therapy, electroshock therapy, all of the above. All of those things were things that happened that Mormons encouraged people to do at the time. It was thought of as a fix. It was thought of as if you go do this, then you won't have these feelings anymore. It went so far as being done in BYU's own psychology department as a research study to see if they could fix these men to make them not have feelings for other men anymore. And there are a variety of men who came out the other side of those treatments and have shared their stories. They are out there. So
yeah, there was a guy on Mormon Stories podcast that shared his experience. It wasn't in BYU. It was more recent, some vaguely associated organization that does those kinds of things. So go and check those out.
We'll link that in the description so you can watch it.
Yeah, it was rather
It's a bit
shocking.
of a trip. Those are things more in line with more like, I don't know how you would say it, but it's like more modern versions of the same kind of idea that if you do XYZ, then you will be less inclined to have these feelings, which will make you not gay or not feel like you are.
You can live a normal life.
You can live a normal life.
Quote,
but
unquote.
These kind of start to get into weird iterations where you have touching parties and things of that nature. So we will link that.
Alleged touching
parties. So we'll link that in the description. There's a guy who did a whole interview about it. We don't have time to get into that today, but yeah, there you go. So now, as of, I think 2016 was the most recent thing that I saw, they say that reparative therapy and other sexual orientation change efforts are no longer practiced or encouraged, and they do not find them ethical, which is convenient.
Yeah, it only took about 50 years.
Yeah.
Wasn't the earliest that they were doing it like in the 50s? Let's see. Aversion in 1959 began aversion therapy.
Through the 70s.
And 1986 was where this conversion therapy timeline starts. So, notably, our boy Dallin H. Oaks,
who we were just talking about,
said this.
And what have you done to address some of the things that you've done in the past, including the things that you said and overseeing the enforcement of electric shock and vomiting conversion therapy for LGBT students at BYU?
Let me say about electric shock treatments at BYU. When I became president of BYU, that had been discontinued earlier and it never went on under my administration. Put that to one side. It never went on under my administration.
It's a lie, essentially.
It's a lie. Anyway.
Okay, and then the last part of this table, so heterosexual dating and marriage. So this is kind of there's a lot of nuance. I mean, there's nuance to this whole chart, but there's a lot of nuance here. So in early church teachings, heterosexual dating and marriage was seen as a therapeutic step. So, oh my God.
Hello, kitty. All right.
Hi.
Hey there.
You might hear our cat in the background. I'm sorry.
Which is startling because we've never mentioned that we've had a cat because she doesn't interact with us. So
She hides because our son is a terror.
So anyway.
Anywho, so you might hear her in the background. So heterosexual dating and marriage was seen as something that people part of the LGBTQ plus community could do as a way of... Do you want to say something about this? But now the current position is that, you know, encouraging heterosexual dating or being in a heterosexual marriage is not seen as a therapy or a solution. However, I would like to say that even within the ward that we were in right before we left, they had, I think it was in like a year or two before we left, that they had somebody who identified as a gay man who is in a heterosexual relationship with a woman. And everybody is well aware, and he is like publicly and open about being gay, but they are in a heterosexual marriage, and they came and spoke to a bunch of people in our ward about their situation, their circumstances. And so it is kind of idealized within the Mormon church that you should participate or be in a heterosexual marriage even as a gay person.
Yep, those are the people who are not children of apostles. We'll get to that later. Who get book deals with Deseret Book, and they're paraded around to stake conferences and things like that so they can talk about their experience as a LGBTQ identifying person that's in a heterosexual relationship that forsaked, I don't know, their identity and chose to live as a heterosexual identifying person.
Correct.
So there's a lot of messaging there in regard to that.
So that's kind of the gist as far as the big pieces of early teachings to current. So there has been a lot of change. How would I say it? The foundation, however, is essentially the same. Being gay is a sin, essentially, because they're saying being gay isn't, but there's this whole idea that you can be gay but not act on, Mormons believe homosexuality point blank is a sin.
Yeah. And let's also expand that. When they say homosexuality, that's erasing anything else that belongs to the LGBTQIA. That's just the broad term that they use. So if you're bisexual, pansexual, demisexual, asexual is not really a thing. Somebody asked about that. There's absolutely no room for people who are asexual, although you wouldn't be committing any sin. So it's a very broad term that they use homosexuality for. So,
and it is very
it's all a sin.
In early teaching, early church literature about homosexuality, it is mainly directed at men. It's predominantly directed at men. Only as things kind of evolved, did it start to include lesbians specifically. But that even was not as prevalent as the messaging directed towards men specifically. So as far as doctrinal position goes, there are a few things. So the church will say same-sex attraction is okay. It's normal. It happens. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. So the church has a whole website dedicated to this. It used to be Mormons and Gays or something like that.
Mormon and Gay.
.org. I think it's changed to something else now, but they have a whole website about it, okay? So that means they're accepting. So I saw, this is a quote taken directly from the website that says, the struggles of those who are troubled by same-sex attraction are not unique. There are many kinds of temptations, sexual and otherwise. The duty to resist sin applies to all of them. So here we've gone from sexual attraction is like same-sex attraction is okay to same-sex attraction is a sin and you're still obligated to resist it. Do you see the...
Yes.
Do you see the mental gymnastics happening here?
So the what they are saying is you need to, well, it's not the solution, but if you were to marry someone who is as a heterosexual person, then, you know, there's that. But if you don't marry somebody who, or if you're not in a heterosexual relationship, then you can't have sex with anyone else because that's a sin. You can't masturbate. Also, in order to reach exaltation, you have to be married to someone who is of the opposite sex. So you kind of out of options here.
Basically. And so you're denied. A lot of people asked, what's the level of heaven for the LGBTQ plus community?
Yep. If you were a faithful Latter-day Saint, then you would get to almost the top of the celestial kingdom, but that means you have to be living celibate your entire life.
Unless you're with a heterosexual, and you're in a heterosexual relationship.
Then you would be able to make it to the top.
And that's why it's encouraged and pedestalized that gay people should marry into a heterosexual relationship. Because you can still have a
family, you can still reach exaltation.
You can still get into that top kingdom.
But you have to forsake your identity.
Yep.
But if you are a member of the LGBTQ community and you act on that sin, you go and you live your true life, and which I strongly recommend you do, you would get to the telestial kingdom because it is a sin. It is a sexual sin. It is next to murder. And yeah, you'll be down with the murderers and the liars and
whoremongers and
everything like that. So, but trust me, that's much better than anywhere at the top. And you can come visit us in Outer Darkness because that's where I'm going. Anyway.
Anywho, and we're not trying to hate on people who are in Mormonism that have decided that they would participate in a heterosexual relationship despite being gay, and that they feel like that's the best choice for them, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But we
Obviously,
want to...
They have their own lived experience, and I'm not going to discount what...
We're not going to discount that, but we also want to hold space for the fact that there are a lot of people who find that situation not appropriate for them and not a solution to the fact that they're not going to get into the highest level of heaven. Like, that's not an appropriate thing to tell people in the LGBTQ plus community. Like, if you just forsake yourself and get married to the opposite,
then you can be like everybody else.
Then you can be like everybody else.
You got to be on your own little island.
Like, it's not an appropriate thing to encourage.
No.
Okay, so if you get married, and here's kind of where the church kind of gets away with a lot of things. If you are in a homosexual relationship and you are not touching each other ever, you might have a case. Maybe. Depending on your bishop. Because there are an increasing amount of people...
So if you have a relationship, a romantic relationship, that's not a romantic relationship.
Yes.
There you go.
That would be your caveat to be like it being okay. You know what I mean? There are still gay Mormons who are in romantic relationships that participate in church things, but they're limited in what they can do.
Basically, you can attend.
You can attend. You can't hold... Traditionally, most bishops won't allow you to hold callings. And obviously, there's some nuance here as well, kind of depending on your bishop. But they're kind of intense in these areas.
Pretty cut and dry on how they feel about it.
Yeah. And if you get married, and it's not a heterosexual relationship, you can be booted, essentially. So you could be excommunicated, which has happened before, and has happened even recently, and continues to happen. Or they'll just kind of disfellowship you so you can still show up, but you're not allowed to do anything. Like, you can't even take, my understanding is you can't even take the sacrament in that situation.
You can't even pray.
You can't do any of that. So it's like you can show up, but we are making you well aware that we don't condone your behavior, and we really don't want you here.
Yeah. It's like the messaging is pretty obvious about that.
Yes.
Aspect.
So that, as far as relationships go, so you cannot do those things. For our transgender folks, it is a little more nuanced as well. The church they've kind of improved in this area a little bit. You can tell church members, like your bishop, that you are going to go by a different name, and they are encouraged to call you by your preferred name, and they're encouraged to call you by your preferred pronouns. And you can be listed as that name and those pronouns in the church directory. But that is about the extent of your options as far as being able to participate as a transgender person. Any type, like transitioning at all beyond that socially, you can't transition. That's it.
Yeah.
That's what it is. You can't.
No starting hormone replacement therapy, taking estrogen or tea or anything like that at all.
None of that. So they can call you by your name and you can have preferred pronouns, but that's the extent of it. If you go beyond that.
Yeah. Which is also good news for non-binary folks as well.
Sure.
So that's kind of nice.
It's at least something. It's a step in the right direction, but.
I mean, it's like the first page on a ream.
It's a little patronizing.
It's really nothing deep at all.
No. And that's kind of the extent as far as official positions within Mormonism on the LGBTQ plus community. There is no real discussion of anything else because the church like everything within the church is in the binary of men and women.
Literally.
And so there is no real
it's just men and women, gay or straight. That's it.
There's no attention paid to any other aspects or parts of the community who identify as, pansexual or demisexual, or any of those are not really relevant to the church because they see these two things black and white. So there's gay people and there's transgender people, and that's kind of the end of it. They do in their handbook have a section on intersex people, but they have no position on it. So it's not
a biological fact. No comment.
The handbook was like, parents might decide to have surgeries or make decisions and be supportive. That was kind of the gist of it.
Because they can't admit that God would make a mistake by not, and gender is eternal, and it's got to be a binary until legally it's not, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you introduce a person that's neither here nor there, which maybe is not a good way to describe it, but now they're like, oh, okay, so we've got to forsake all that other stuff to include this. Never mind, we're not going to forsake all that other stuff. You got to just figure it out for yourself.
Well, and the biblical basis for everything, like for the majority of other churches, evangelical, Catholic, that same base of homosexuality is a sin is the same base in Mormonism. They use those same verses. They repeat those same things. The real difference is, the policy and how they treat these things within the church as far as leadership goes. And then they do have one other document specifically that they pull from when they're talking about these issues, which is the Family Proclamation. And they hit on this constantly. Like, most Mormons have a copy of it framed in their home.
I did.
We did.
When I was a kid. We were going to put it on our wall when we first moved to
into our apartment. Yeah. And so in reality, it's like an amicus brief. And it was written after Hawaii passed same-sex marriage.
What's the timeline on that?
I don't remember.
But it was in the same year, right?
Yeah.
99?
It was in response to Hawaii for sure.
It was either 99 or 2000. I don't remember.
So they got their panties in a wad because Hawaii
Their
passed
garmies.
it. Their garmies in a wad. And so they had to do something. And so they wrote this really powerful document about the fact that gender is eternal and men and women are to be married, and that is the divine law. And there is nothing like the nuclear family. This is the basis. Like, it's men and women, period, end of story. And so that's kind of one of the things that they really hit on when they're talking about these kinds of things. But for the most part, they hit and reference the same things that the other churches do.
That was basically so they didn't have to reference the same scriptures that other churches were doing, and to be like, yes, we have continued revelation. God told us to write this, and we're set apart from everybody else in saying that being gay is a sin.
Yeah.
So there's that. That was in 99 or 2000.
And then we have, I wanted to put together a timeline because that's kind of the nitty gritty of it all, right? And their standards, what they believe, their policies, but
the common era for everybody viewing this.
Yeah, but it gets more complicated than that as things do, right? So we wanted to kind of go through history a little bit and kind of hit on the big things. We talked about conversion therapy, and there's a lot of horrible things that happened in the church in the very beginning. But we're taking you to much more recent times, starting with 2008. Okay. So for those of you that are ex-Mormon, you're going to be like, oh, I know where they're going. Set the scene with California, 2008, Proposition 8. Do you want to talk about what Prop 8 did?
Yeah, Prop 8 was to mandate in the state of California that marriage was only between a man and a woman. And we've talked about this before, kind of briefly. So a lot of evangelical Christians, and especially the Mormons, they were really going hard on Prop 8. One of the guys we follow on TikTok, Alan Mount, was a young member at this time. And he was on talking about how one day they came into Sunday school and the stake presidency was there and was like, we're going to take this hour. Everybody take signs, like the little yard signs, and we're going to go canvass and ask everybody that we can if you can put a sign in their lawn for support for Prop 8. And he said they went to a bunch of houses, and the only person who said yes also said a bunch of homophobic slurs. And after that, his dad was like, hey, why don't you go on home? I will finish up here. Can you imagine? Anyway.
This was a really common experience for Mormons who lived in California.
Yeah, this was huge.
And mind you now, the church's positions on political things is that they don't take a position for the most part. They just encourage members to be active in the political process. So that's kind of their position. But then they went balls deep into Prop 8.
Both sides of their mouth.
And so, like he said, they were doing a lot of things. They were not only asking for donations, which they were. They were asking for time. They were asking for members to phone bank. They were asking for members to put up signs in their yard, to go door to door. Like, they spent a lot of time in this.
Because of the family, a proclamation to the world.
And they even sent a letter to members stating, this is our position on Prop 8, and we encourage you to vote in favor of Prop 8. Like, it was black and white. I mean, they were involved, and they spent a ton of money. So in the news article that I read right before this, opponents estimate that the church gave more than $20 million in efforts to pass Prop 8.
Oof.
So it's reasonable to consider that probably included tithing money for members. I would say probably more than likely.
I in a previous video put a article that said the church proper spent $190,000 on campaigning for Prop 8. So I'm
So there's
assuming
some
that
wild
20
estimates out
million,
there.
that's $190,000 too much for a religious organization to be lobbying at all.
But it does seem like a smaller amount to me.
Well, yeah, that's a lot smaller.
No, but I mean,
Oh.
like, in context of the time and effort that they put in, it seems to me like they
that
would have
is-
spent a lot more.
That's cash that they put in. I'm
okay.
assuming this 20 million
Yeah.
number is all the members making donations, their time spent, and things of that
that
nature.
makes
I'm
more
talking about cash donated from the church to efforts
190
to
was cash. Yeah, I did read that. So that was Prop 8. So again, this just kind of reaffirms that, you know,
It didn't pass, did it?
no.
Didn't figure.
And so being, you know,
Love wins.
we love gay people, but we're going to pour millions of dollars into Prop 8 to
gonna-
make sure you can't marry each other.
Actively oppose any civil right that you may have to marry the person that you choose.
Exactly. November 2015 rolls around and the church is becoming more confident in their position on the LGBTQ plus community. So in November 2015, they come out with a policy that says that children living in a same-sex household may not be blessed as babies or baptized until they are 18. In traditional Mormon doctrine, culture, whatever you want to call it, children are baptized at 8, and all children are blessed like within the first year of birth. So children of gay parents could not be blessed or baptized, which is inappropriate. But they take it one step further, saying that when that child turns 18, they must disavow the practice of same-sex marriage, whether, you know, whether the couple is living together or whether they're married, it doesn't matter. And they have to not live with them anymore in order to join the church. So they have to effectively tell their parents that they disavow their lifestyle and don't support them in what they're doing, and they have to move out, which at 18 is a tricky thing to do.
Thing.
And so that was special. And then they take it one step further and define those in same-sex marriages as apostates. They literally call them apostates in the handbook. Like us.
Notably, this is in true Mormon cover your asses, we've got a bunch of lawyers fashion. In June, 5 months prior to this policy, the Obergefell versus Hodges case was determined in the Supreme Court and cited that same-sex marriage was legal on the federal level. So that's kind of funny how policy changed that quick. Also, important to note that many people have cited this not as a revelation, but as just a policy thing.
Which they did interpret it at the time and say that it was a revelation.
Yeah.
This, I mean, an event like it is a policy. It's a policy change, right? But typically, most of the time when the church makes like groundbreaking decisions like this, they tell you that it's based in revelation. Like the prophets have been fervently praying about it, and this is a revelation to a change in policy. So when this policy came out, it was extremely controversial. So in those first initial days, 1,500 people protested outside church headquarters here in Salt Lake City, and the majority of them, while they were protesting, dropped off their resignations at church headquarters. And then what's estimated to be at least thousands more submitted their resignations online to the church. So they officially resigned from the church because of this policy. And so for looking, interacting with ex-Mormon TikTok and interacting with ex-Mormons more since we've started, it is incredibly common to hear that the November 2015 policy was a reason a lot of people either left the church or was a huge factor in their decision to leave the church. November 2015, that policy that hit hard. Like, I do not think that they truly understood what they were doing and the impact that was going to have on the church, because it did not go well. Like, the people on the fringe and a lot of anybody who was remotely supportive of the LGBTQ plus community would hear something like this and be like, really? Why are we doing
Seriously.
this?
What was it like for you? Because I was on my mission. I was in Honduras at the time, and this is really not a thing. It's really Christian conservative kind of ideals on sexuality in Honduras. So I almost really didn't even hear anything about this. I don't recall us being sent any talking points like a lot of the stateside missionaries were at the time. But you were a freshman, weren't you, at the U?
Yep. I was still in the church at this time, and my mom was still in the church at this time. And I remember going to her and being like, I don't agree with this. I don't understand why this is a thing. I can't wrap my mind around this. It just doesn't seem right. And my mom settled on the fact that she interpreted it as the church was trying not to cause contention within the family. The church was trying to prevent Mormon children or children who wanted to be baptized from offending their gay, lesbian, LGBTQ plus parents. And that's how a lot
dead take.
That's how a lot of members interpreted this, because there's really, in my opinion, there's really no other positive way to frame this and think that it's okay.
Well, and you're just looking at it in the framework of a child who's not yet 18. Fast forward to the day they turn 18 and they do want to get baptized. How are they going to keep their family together when they disavow their family or their parents' practice, quote unquote, their relationship really, and then move out because of it? Oh my God, that's bad.
So
anyway.
For a lot of people, this was a shelf item for them, right? Something that eventually broke their shelf or did break their shelf. And I kind of sat with that group, right? And so I might have an overestimation of how many people were impacted by this policy, because they did, I can't remember which news station or what journalist did it, but they did a study in 2016 asking church members if they agreed with this policy, and the vast majority of them did. So this wasn't like, I don't know. This wasn't like,
blue?
I don't know. How would you say that? This wasn't like an asteroid hitting the church and like blowing half of it away.
Yeah, it wasn't like catastrophic loss.
No, not at all. From my opinion, it was, because I was more on the fringe and I was seeing more people who identified with that. And I felt like more like younger members agreed with that more than older members were. And then comes 2019. The 2015 policy just kind of faded into the background. The people who disagreed with it stopped voicing their concerns about it, or people just stopped listening. And within the church, things just moved on.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, between 2015 in 2018, the Mormon prophet Thomas Monson passed away. So a new prophet was called Russell M. Nelson, and a new first presidency as well. So one of the counselors, there's the prophet and his two counselors. One of them was released. What's his face? Henry Eyring still remains as one of the counselors, as well as my boy Dallin H. Oaks was called from Russell M. Nelson.
So there was a change in leadership, which could have contributed to this change. But in 2019, the church made a statement in April of 2019 saying that the church will no longer characterize same-gender marriage by a church member as apostasy for purposes of church discipline, although it is still considered a serious transgression. Okay. And then the changes issued at the direction of the first presidency. They announced during conference that they do not represent a shift in church doctrine related to marriage or the commandments of God in regard to chastity or morality. So essentially what they decided to do was they were going to reverse this policy as a whole, like the whole thing. They were just going to toss the whole thing out. They redefined what same-gender marriage within the church was. It's no longer apostasy, but it's still pretty bad. But they reverse it. So the policy is done away with completely, and this is stated as follows. These policy changes come after an extended period of counseling with our brethren in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles after fervent, united prayer to understand the will of the Lord. So again, we come back to the same idea that when the church makes policy changes, They root it in revelation. Like God finally came to them and said, yes, the 2015 policy that did nothing but cause pain for the majority of people involved does not need to cause pain anymore. And you can get rid of it now.
Yeah. So that's fun. Notably, a lot of people kind of continued to paint this in the best of light, saying it was a trial to separate the wheat from the tares. Those who didn't have faith and couldn't hold on for 4 years are people like us who just get offended and jump ship at the slightest inconvenience or whatever.
Been getting a lot of that lately.
Yeah, interesting. But like, I can't understand how people are able to rationalize shit like that. Like the story of Abraham and Isaac, kind of the same deal where God was like, hey, you need to do this really hard thing. And I want you to do it. And Abraham is like, okay, I will kill my son. And then right at the last minute, he goes, psych. And so it's just kind of modeled that behavior, and God can be an asshole whenever he wants and just take it back whenever he wants to. So,
yeah, and be like, oh, it was, I
don't know how that's a trial of your faith. That's just a show of your
power,
integrity.
Yeah. So that's kind of how these things go in the church. Really, with any policy changes, they're like, well, the Lord revealed to us XYZ, or lack thereof. They will, like, in talks, they will say, we continue to plead with the Lord about the pains of the LGBTQ youth, and they make it appear like they want to change things, but just God isn't allowing them to, so they can't do anything about it. Really convenient, isn't it? So now we come to the point where BYU kind of enters the scene, because as much as the church perpetuates homophobia and transphobia and just absolute awfulness on the whole, BYU also plays a special role in perpetuating those things as well. So we are going to start with what I honestly think was one of the worst things that BYU has ever done in its long string of worst things. In February of 2020. So remember, if you go to BYU, you have to sign a contract that you're going to live by the honor code, right? So you live by the church's honor code that says you can do XYZ and you can't do XYZ. Homosexual behavior at the university is against the honor code. Period.
Any sort of relationship or
hand-holding,
exploration,
kissing,
or anything like that is strictly prohibited.
Strictly prohibited. And remember, the university students are encouraged to tattle on each other if they see those kinds of things. And so if you identify as a member of the LGBTQ plus community and you are at BYU, this is often a very stressful and anxiety inducing time, because if you're even trying remotely to explore those things, there's always the possibility that someone's going to find out and somebody's going to turn you into the honor code office. So keep that in mind. And we're not saying, let's caveat that we're not saying that LGBTQ students wouldn't want to go to BYU, because some of them do. And we're not here to shame those students for making that choice, because it's based on what they feel is best for them at the time. But we are making the statement that BYU is not an affirming or friendly environment for LGBTQ students, and actually often causes harm and causes students to be outed in these situations.
There's also other considerations that you have to take into mind why people go to BYU, even if it's not an affirming school. Some people have a long line of BYU graduates in their family. Other people, the rhetoric surrounding BYU for a lot of families is that BYU is the Lord's school. And if you are a gay believing Mormon, just because you're gay doesn't take away the fact that this is kind of built up in your mind as one of the best universities that you can go to. And in a lot of aspects, that may be true. I don't like the university, but for a lot of people, that's true. And then there's also, you have to take into consideration that some students have to choose between going to BYU and their parents paying for BYU tuition because A, it's subsidized by tithing, and B, it's a faith-affirming place for their child to be while at university. Or the other option, is their parents pay nothing and they have to take on massive amounts of debt so that they can go to school. So some people are kind of just forced into it for that reason. So just be aware that there's a lot of nuance to people attending BYU who don't want to attend BYU.
There are a variety of them who are there that don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And it's parental expectation, and a lot of them get so, they get a few years into their degree and they don't agree with what's happening at BYU, but do you want to waste like that time and effort in schooling in order to start over?
You will lose a substantial amount of credits for transferring anywhere else.
Because BYU is just stupid in how they set their stuff up in academia. So, February 2020, okay, BYU makes a random, weird, out-of-character announcement and removes part of the honor code. So there's part of the honor code that states all forms of physical intimacy that give expression to homosexual feelings is prohibited. So that includes kissing, hand-holding, touching, anything of that nature is prohibited, right? It's considered homosexual behavior. They removed that from the honor code. So there is no part in there anymore in the BYU honor code about homosexual behavior.
Well, and they made an announcement. They're like, there's been some changes to the honor code. That's it.
It wasn't just in the middle of the night. Like it was made known to students that there was this change. So students were like, what the hell? Are you serious?
Okay, maybe they're a little more progressive now.
And I remember when they announced this thinking, I was like, oh my God, maybe this is a huge step
change
in the right direction. And BYU is finally getting their shit together and just allowing members of the LGBT community do what they want to do. Like they're not harming anyone. So that's really what we thought at the time. And that's what students thought at the time. And mind you, there were a variety of students who were reluctant to think that this change was legitimate. And so we'll throw up the tweet. I'm going to the honor code office as soon as I get out of class to make sure, but several people have confirmed that gay students can now date and it is not against the honor code. So these group of students go to the honor code office and she tweets following and says, it is confirmed gay dating is okay. Kissing and hand holding is okay from the mouth of an honor code office counselor. Okay.
From the horse's mouth.
They literally went to the office and asked. Okay. Like it doesn't get any more like direct than that. Like it doesn't. They double checked. They crossed their T's. They dotted their I's. They wanted to make sure. And so what happened in the next week or two is a variety of students came out at BYU. Some of them were already dating.
Yep.
Other people are participating, in same-sex relationships in secret because it's against the honor code. And so a lot of them just made their relationships public. They handheld on campus. And it caused kind of a wave of perceived safety at BYU that things were changing and people could come out and be accepted, essentially. And so that ended up happening a lot. A lot of BYU students came out during this time period, shared that they were identifying with certain things and not others.
They felt comfortable for probably the first time in their career at BYU.
Right.
With being public in their sexuality.
Yeah, and not being afraid that you were going to get tattled on.
Yeah.
And somebody was going to turn you in for, hand holding with your same-sex partner.
Significant other.
Yeah. And so it created kind of like a domino effect of a lot of students actually came out to their parents and said, BYU is making it a safer place, and so I'm ready. And so a lot of them ended up sharing that information with family and friends that hadn't been shared before. So,
of course, that's not the end of that story.
It's not. So 2 weeks later, the church president issues a statement.
The church or the university president?
The university president.
Okay.
Issues a statement saying that same-sex romantic behavior is not compatible with the rules of the school and remains against the honor code.
Even though it's not explicit in the honor code, it's still implied that it is not allowed.
They essentially faulted these students in saying, what the church doctrine and policy is on this issue. And so it shouldn't have to be expressly written in the honor code in order for you to understand that.
The church president gaslit them after people even went to the honor code, and the honor code office counselors were like, yeah, that's fine.
That's what it is, that they took it out. So
yeah. So,
and the reasoning behind it, if I remember correctly, when I read the letter, was that they were making like church-wide changes to the church education system, and were changing parts of the honor code policy to like align more closely with what the church doctrine is, and so there wasn't such a discrepancy between the two.
Yeah.
But essentially, here's what happened: is the church says you're free to be who you are and love who you love and be public about it on this university. And students were taking pictures. Many of them took pictures kissing their partners in front of the honor code office, on campus, in front of the big, Brigham Young statue, taking pictures of themselves kissing and hand holding and, loving their partners on campus. And so the majority, like a good lot of them, made this public. Like, this was public information. It was being shared on social media. It was being shared on Facebook. And then they come out and say, just kidding. It's still against the honor code.
So now they know exactly who is going to be disciplined by the honor code office.
They just outed all these people. So their roommate,
their roommates now know, and classmates, people who are working on group projects with them. And now these people are like, oh, now I know that my classmate is doing something that's against the honor code. I should probably keep an eye on them.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. And it was total whiplash. I was so disappointed when all of this happened, because I cannot think of a more, like, it's gaslighty, it's manipulative. I hesitate to think that they didn't know this was going to happen. I don't want to believe that this was a manipulative tactic to make this behavior public, so it wasn't so difficult to kind of identify this behavior on campus and punish this behavior. I don't want to think that's what happened, but the way this played out, it's hard to believe that that's not what happened. They allowed this to happen for 2 weeks. 2 weeks this whole situation went on. It's not like they made the changes, all the kids on campus are taking pictures, in front of the campus, making out with their partner, because it's chill now. Why the hell not? I would be doing the same thing. And then next day they're like, oh shit, we're sorry. We get that you guys misunderstood. But they let it sit for 2 weeks.
The honor code counselors knew that people were asking this question. They let it sit for 2 weeks.
It's not like the church didn't know what was going on.
Regardless of intention, it's irrelevant because it's abuse.
Basically.
They're literally just gaslighting these students. And a vulnerable moment has now become basically a big red X on their back.
Yeah. It's totally exploitative, and my heart broke for all of the students at that time who felt an actual sense of safety and leaned into it, because they shouldn't be constantly looking over their shoulder waiting for the inevitable fall in these situations. And that turned out to be exactly what happened here. So there were a lot of consequences for this. The church never owned it. The church never said anything about it. There was no apology. That letter came out saying there's never apologies, as we talked about in our last video. But that was the end of it. It just faded into the background. Not without protest from students at the university. Once that letter came out, it was either the same day or the next day, there were a lot of students who identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community who went out and protested the church's decision, saying, I don't understand why this is happening. You lied. You misled us. I don't understand. This isn't Christ-like behavior. Jesus loves us. Why can't you? So it didn't go without protest from the students. Yeah. But in typical BYU and church fashion, protests don't do anything, and they doesn't care.
Matter. Yeah. And that was all kind of swept under the rug because the year was just shit. That was literally right before the pandemic really broke out in Utah. So as soon as it was out of the news cycle pretty quick.
So Essentially, LGBTQ plus students continue to fight at BYU to be treated fairly. Students on campus in heterosexual relationships can do all those things, but students in same-sex, same-gender, LGBTQ plus relationships can't. So it is kind of obviously discriminatory in that sense, and so they're just asking for equality in that sense, but it doesn't align with church doctrine, and so I don't personally see that ever changing unless the church changes fundamental doctrine, which they claim they never will. So that leads us to the most probably notable thing that happened is a year later in March of 2021, a group of students get together, and I don't even know how they did it, but they took a shit ton of lights or flashlights or
Big ol' lights.
whatever the hell they did. They trekked up to the Y, which is on the mountain in Provo. It's a Y. We'll throw up a picture. And
It's
they,
like rocks painted on the side of the mountain. I don't know if that's a common thing elsewhere.
it's everywhere in Utah.
We have a lot of worldwide viewers. Literally, the school is right below a mountainside, and they, like all the fucking high schools and universities in the area, they put like the initial of their school on the mountain. No clue why, but that's just something they do.
That's what they do. There's a U for where I went. There's a Y for BYU.
There's a like nearby us. There's like a B for Bountiful, a V for Viewmont, and
It's like
I don't know
weird.
why. It's weird.
Utah does this. I don't know. So and you can hike up to it. So it's like a whole like university event because everybody like gets together and hikes up to the Y, and it's like a thing. We did the same thing at the U. So essentially, they get a bunch of lights for all the colors, do, rainbow, take them all up to the Y, light it all up. And so they did the work. They
Literally
trekked up that Y.
Can't even be classified as vandalism or anything.
They didn't paint
Nobody
anything.
was hurt.
Nope. It was them, like they...
Just light cast on
The white
rocks.
Y. Yep. So obviously it lit up on the mountain. It was, you could see it from great distances. They truly...
Yeah, it was
They did a great
a
job.
spectacle.
And so obviously it's getting picked up on, right? Because the Y is on the mountain and everybody can see it.
The very, very Mormon Provo below
Can
is
see it.
noticing.
And so they're up there for a while. I don't remember how long they stayed up there, but it was a while. And eventually BYU from their official Twitter account tweets, BYU did not authorize the lighting of the Y.
I think that was the next day, wasn't it?
No, I think it was the same night.
We'll have to look.
We'll have to look. But either way, they come out and say BYU did not authorize the lighting
No
of the
shit.
Y. Really?
Yeah.
I am shocked. This is shocking information. But again, this just reinforces everything that we've been telling you thus far. Every time they seem to make headway in being more supportive and being more inclusive, they could have just let it happen.
They just walk it back.
They just walk it all back and make it even worse than it was to begin with. And they do it every single time. It is, I don't even know why I'm shocked anymore, but they do this every time.
Yeah. And it wasn't even like on a lot of cases, they'll just be like, well, whatever happens. And if they get too much questions about it, or donors are threatening to withhold their annual donations or XYZ thing, then they finally walk back. But within it, whether if it was right after or the next morning, not a lot of time for they know. They were like, nope, this wasn't us.
Yep. Had to make that statement, right?
Dumb.
Okay. So that falls in line with what happens 2 months later. There is a prominent gay member of the church who is on Twitter, and he has a really BYU student. He has a lot of followers. He has a decent sized platform within the Mormon community. And one of BYU's professors calls him Korahor.
A prominent BYU professor.
A very, I would say,
department.
well-respected professor for Mormons. Like, he's very...
Yeah.
He's highly upheld within
He's
Mormonism.
like an intellectual and a
He's written
spiritual
books
giant.
yeah.
And yeah, Hank Smith. We're talking about you.
We're
if you see this, or if anybody knows Hank Smith, tell him to go fuck himself.
He sucks. Our dog's on our bed.
Oops.
Sorry. And so he calls somebody Korihor, and if you're not familiar with Korihor, it's an antichrist in the Book of Mormon. So
Yeah.
that's great. Awesome.
So that was fun. Okay.
I'm sorry. We've had both our animals.
This
come in
is
here.
this is just a zoo.
Which in his defense, he's deaf, so he doesn't really know what we're doing, but okay. So and then in August, Elder Holland makes his speech. I think we did a video.
We did a
on
whole
it,
video
too.
on it, yeah. And we also did a video about the reaction to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did a whole video on it if you want to watch it, but essentially one
I guess it's on this side.
we're a bit of a hot
Okay.
mess tonight. Essentially he's an apostle. He's in the 12 apostles. He has big sway with Mormons, and he was like, we have to defend the nuclear family,
Yeah.
the traditional marriage, and we need to take up our muskets and perfect it.
Yeah, intellectuals of this institution take up your muskets and defend what it stands for, basically. So.
Yeah. Don't let gay marriage become a thing. We have to
Yeah.
defend the nuclear family.
Which, I mean, Jeff, read the room with the guns and schools. This country that we live in does not have a good track record. Maybe take that into consideration when you're crafting your metaphors, you doofus.
He's a piece of shit anyway. I used to really like him when we were members.
Yeah. If you want to hear more about what we think about him,
Go watch that video. So that causes some protests. It ruffled a lot of Mormon feathers as well as ex-Mormon feathers. And essentially one of the biggest things that happened was Mormons and ex-Mormons alike took to the BYU campus with sidewalk chalk and essentially just wrote positive affirming messages for the LGBTQ plus community on campus. This went on for a few days, especially after BYU staff decided to hose it down.
Well, I think that was standard procedure,
Yeah.
but they were doing it a lot more often than
they were washing
would be
off
normal.
the sidewalk chalk with water. Okay, which sure it might be policy, but read
it's
the
also
room.
a pretty bold statement to be going through, and
Hello, do you? Again, they don't get it.
They
don't get it.
literally are so just. They put the blinders on. They do not care.
They don't care. And so that led to somebody was walking by the campus at night, and there was I will call him a boy because he's a boy.
He's a loser.
He's a loser. He was on campus pouring water on the sidewalk chalk, the messages, and I don't know if they were Mormons or not, but so ex-Mormons confronted him and were like,
What
the
doing
hell
there,
are you
bud?
doing? Like, why are you doing this?
Of course, he was doing this alone under the cover of night because he's a loser.
Because he's a loser. And he essentially went off on the ex-Mormons who were calling him out. And it wasn't like a confrontation. It was literally just like, dude, what the hell? Like, why are you doing this? And he dropped a few slurs, including the F word. And essentially,
They don't get into heaven.
Yeah.
They go to hell, he says.
yeah, F words go to hell. So that was really special. This was a BYU student, a Mormon. I don't for sure know how they handled him, but the news reported a few days later that he did not attend BYU anymore. So I don't know if he left of his own free will and volition
So
because
that's
his
a W.
face was on the video. People know who he is. I'm
Yeah.
sure friends were like, oh God, I know who that is.
Yeah, I hope everybody was on the phone with the honor code office once they saw that.
Right? So there are two things that I want to hit on just at the end here. In December or January, one of the 12 apostles, his name is
Garrett Gong.
He's new.
He is new. He is a person of color.
Yeah.
And he, as far as Mormon apostles goes, he is at the bottom of the shit list. He is about as good as they can be.
He's very wholesome. He is held in high esteem because he has a LGBTQ plus connection. His son is gay. And that usually holds a lot of weight within Mormonism for those who feel positively towards the LGBTQ plus community, because they're like, he gets it. He understands.
Remember, though, just because of that does not mean he is not on the shit list. He is still on the shit list.
And we're going to add him on the shit list right now. So his son came out with a letter, a very vulnerable, courageous, beautiful letter, where he talked about going to dinner with his mom and dad, with his partner. They go to dinner. He says everything goes well. Everyone's polite. Everyone's nice. It goes off without a hitch. Everything's great. And they the four of them take a picture together of all of them there at dinner. And he's feeling great. He's like, my dad holds these beliefs right, but he can be supportive and loving of me. And we'll go to dinner with my partner and I, which for there's a lot of Mormons who would never, ever do that.
Let alone an apostle.
Right. So this is like good shit, right? So you're reading up to this point. I'm like, hell yeah. And then he keeps writing.
And the story, as the story goes,
he says,
does not get any better.
Just as we're pulling into the driveway, Elder Gong spoke up. Please don't post that photo anywhere. Unsure what he was referring to, I asked for clarification. Please don't post the photo from dinner. We wouldn't want people to get the wrong idea. I turned bitter. I pushed back, anger flaring in my chest. What's the wrong idea? That you just had dinner with your son? Please don't post the photo. We wouldn't want people to get the wrong idea. And that is...
He is the most, liberal of any of them, in my opinion, especially because he was he served in the Obama administration. But sounds like everybody got to him if he ever was that way, if he was that way
to begin with. And here's the unfortunate part about all of this is the church always wins. Like, at the end of the day, the majority of people who participate in the church, even the 12 apostles, even the president of the church, as much as they love their children, there will still be a limit. As much as they espouse unconditional love for the people around them, their family members, their children, at the end of the day, if their family members or friends are engaging in homosexual behavior, that's not unconditional love anymore. Because you can't post that photo, because then people will think that I'm condoning your behavior. It can't just be people think you're being supportive and a good father and a good parent. It can't just be that.
No. Well, the person that they worship, that is the modeled behavior, the modeled parenting, that love is not conditional. And the prophet said that
recently.
God's love is conditional. It is not unconditional.
Nope.
It is predicated on your faithfulness and your worthiness. So I don't know why they would act any different if the quote unquote God that they worship does the same exact thing. It's
heartbreaking, because I'm not going to speak for his son. His name's Matthew Gong. But, I mean, it's really, sometimes I feel like really simple. Like, you just want simple things. Like, we took a photo together.
Literally, you didn't have to say anything about the photo.
And
or who's in it.
I think about it now, and I think if they would have posted that photo somewhere, I think it would have been huge, more than well received.
For somebody.
Huge for those kids out there who are feeling the same way, for adults who are feeling the same way, for parents who are in that position, to show that kind of unconditional love for a child, which is in our opinion, the bare ass minimum. Like, seriously.
It would have been huge for the people who are not affirming of the LGBTQ plus community because they could have their fucking token and say, hey, look, Elder Gong posted a picture with his son and his son's partner. We love the gays, even though we oppress them as much as we can within the law, the means of the law and everything like that. So I really don't know why he would do that to himself. And now probably a PR shitstorm in Utah, at least.
Yeah.
But
the church would have never allowed that to happen.
Come on.
And he knew that. So that was heartbreaking. That was in December, January. And then in December, flashback to our lighting the Y situation.
December 2021, last month,
they added a policy, shocking, that prevents people from going up to the Y and prevents any like public demonstrations, protests on church property, which includes the Y. But they are saying that it is founded in safety and they don't want people going up to the Y and falling down and injuring themselves. Wasn't a problem for the last 100 years that damn thing's been there. But
suddenly now it's important as we approach the anniversary of the lighting of the Y that we ban any sort of situation where people could light the Y.
Seriously.
So good job. It's funny too because a lot of Mormons, oh man, especially, I mean, Dallin Oaks, it was a Utah State Supreme Court justice. So he fucking loves the Constitution. And man, they're really looking to stifle free speech now.
I don't know if you can see.
If you haven't noticed, other than our
see
dog.
Him? He's snoring. I don't know if you can hear that.
Literally, we're talking really loud and he's
he has no idea.
He's deaf. If you haven't noticed, this is a Dallin H. Oaks hate channel. We do not like Dallin H. Oaks.
No, we don't.
Anyway.
So essentially, that was a lot of information, but there was a lot that we wanted to get to and touch on because a lot of you have had questions about this, and we probably didn't get to all of them. But essentially, I feel like the goal here was to say this is Mormonism's charge, right? This is their goal. This is reminding people that homosexuality is a sin, identifying outside of the gender binary is a sin. Yeah. And you can't do those things and get to the highest level of heaven. And I think as much as Mormons want to, we love the gays. We support people with same-sex attraction. We want them involved. You can only do that for so long.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, people are going to dig down into your comments, and then we realize that it's surface level.
Very thinly veiled. And it's sad because going back to the article that we started with, there's an investigation into things that this private school is constitutionally allowed the liberty to do because it's a religious school and has been allowed to do.
They have religious exemptions from the Department of Ed, OCR, or whatever.
They are literally, they have been allowed to do this for a long time. So maybe it's time to make some reforms in this country because I think in a lot of other countries, this kind of behavior would not fly.
So in summary, we are huge supporters of the LGBTQ plus community. We are constantly trying to learn. I feel like anybody who grows up in the church or, any type of, evangelical Christians, Catholics, anybody who really pushes the homosexuality as a sin agenda grew up with a lot of internalized homophobia. And so checking those kinds of things as you go, it's hard, but it's necessary. And it's, for the majority of us, probably a lifelong thing.
Yep.
And so that's our goal.
In 10 years, things have way changed for me. Even being a missionary, I would have said the F slur. That is not a word I'd ever say ever again, but it's not hard to change. You don't have to be an edgy 17-year-old for the rest of your life. No, you don't. You can grow up and you can make a change.
And you don't have to hold these things true. Yeah. Just because you once believed it doesn't mean that you have to maintain that. And it's not bad to look back on things you've done in the past and been like, that was shitty, but I don't believe that anymore. Like, I'm gonna hold myself accountable for those things because it was shitty and I shouldn't have done it. But I'm moving forward and I'm trying to do better. And that's the whole goal. And I hope that's what the message that we encourage people is, that you don't have to stay stuck where you are because you grew up in a pretentious religion that doesn't preach unconditional love. Like, you don't have to stay there, regardless of whether you're religious or not. This is an ongoing process, and it's okay to admit that you've made mistakes. We've made them and we'll continue to make them, but it's your charge to keep going.
We're also always open to criticism and corrections. Yeah. We read through the comments and we value the opinions of people who belong to the LGBTQ community, and we are willing to make those changes when they're needed. So leave a comment. If you're listening, you can email us at jordanandmckay@gmail.com, and we will definitely take what you were saying into serious consideration. So please, any feedback is great.
Yeah. And we know language matters, and so we try to be very mindful of language, but there are times where we slip up or say things. And so, and people do call us out for that, and we do appreciate it. It's not like, we're never trying to be intentionally harmful.
Yeah. And you're not going to hurt our feelings. We understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like, oh, they said something, they criticized me, and now I feel bad, so I'm just going to be mad about it and put that anger on them. No. We're
not doing that.
Yeah.
So we support the LGBTQ plus community. We support everyone involved, no matter where they are on the spectrum, whether they've decided to take on a label or not, whether they're just figuring it out, whether they're in religion and just trying to get through the end of the day each day with homophobic parents or family members. So we get it. If you're stuck there, hang on. I know it's hard, but hang on. It's worth it. So we'll include a little list of resources, just education-wise or for yourself, if you're struggling, or if you just want more information to educate yourself, that works too. But I think that about sums it up.
Yeah. One question that people were asking, and something that I will take to the grave, and it is not a very popular opinion always in the Mormon, ex-Mormon, Mormon adjacent communities. People ask, can you be an ally and be a full believing member of the church? This is what I'll say. If your tithing dollars are going to the active oppression of a group of people, do you support that person? That's all I'll say about that. So that was a little heavy with some comic relief in some of them. We're going to get back to the temple videos next week.
Monday.
Way to make a promise. Oh, we got to work hard to meet that deadline.
Monday.
Monday, we're going to come out with the next temple video. So keep an eye out for that. We're going to be talking about the changes that the endowment has undergone, the ties or interpolations of Freemasonry in the endowment ceremony,
and all your other questions that we haven't addressed.
A lot of other questions. So stay tuned for that. If you want to find us on social media, at Jordan and McKay on TikTok and Instagram. If you would like to support us on Patreon, we've been getting a flood of new patrons, and I want to take a moment and thank all of our amazing patrons. A lot of them at this point have not made it into the slides, so we will be updating that very soon so that they can get credit. We do it on a monthly basis for the contribution they've made, but our patrons are amazing, and I feel like I don't do enough for them to feel like it's worth it to be a patron of ours. So
we love them so much.
I don't know how to express our gratitude enough. Anyway, so Patreon, you can get in contact with us on our Discord in the description on YouTube if you're watching. If you are just listening, go over to YouTube and find it, because I don't know how I would link the Discord invite. So that's awesome. Other than that, if you stuck around for this long, thank you very much. You were very awesome, and we will see you next time.